What's up, RotoGrinders? Welcome to the 11 o'clock DFS pregame show here today. I am making my debut on this. Going to talk some results, DB. Going to talk about my own 150. We can laugh at my lineups last night. Going to talk a little bit about some of the top players in the industry, as well as a small look ahead into tomorrow as well. So we've got the chat open. I'm going to be very interactive with you guys today. If you want to chat, either on YouTube or on RotoGrinders, I will interact with just about any question you have for me regarding anything in results, DB, anything any of the top pros did, anything I did personally. So let's have some fun today, boys. All right, so what I've got pulled up here is this is how I sort of use results DB. Everyone's got a kind of has their own way to do it. So one of the first things I do just about every time I pull up results DB, whether it's preparing for a show or sort of doing my own research, is I just pull up basically the contests I'm interested in. I don't dabble in the Thunderdome. I don't dabble in the 555s. That's not my game. I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at these. I play sort of these contests when I play tournaments. I'm still just barely allowed to dabble in the mini-max. I did that on Draftkings last night. We're going to talk about that and sort of my process that I use for that. I like the 20 max entry games, the 4-point play. And then if I ever play sort of the large 100K to first type of tournaments, maybe I hand build 5 to 10 lineups for that. So if I'm trying to gauge ownership, I stick to the contests I play. I'm not really trying to find out what happened in the Thunderdome. That's just it doesn't apply to me. So I'm not really going to spend too much time looking at it. So last night I did 150 in the mini max. We can talk about that. And I have this might be a strong take, but the ownership in the mini max, it is a very competitive contest compared to sort of like your $1 single entry and the 20 entry max $4 tournament. The ownership is just, I wouldn't say it's sharp, but the chalk really gets heavily owned in the mini max. This goes on day to day to day to day. So if you happen to play in that one, you can sort of see this across the board. All the highest ownership plays, they are all green over here in the mini-max. So if you're going to leverage off of ownership, you can certainly get a little bit bigger of an edge in the mini-max where it sort of falls down into the 20-max. It falls down a little bit into some of these contests as well. So I've noticed that from looking at results DB for a long time. It's a really chalky contest. It's got all of the wannabe ballers, right, that want to play $3,000 or $4,000 a night in the fadeaway, but they just don't have hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s of bankroll. So it does tend to be pretty chalky, and it's actually a really competitive contest. The field's even bigger too, so you have to do things a little bit differently, right? In the fadeaway, maybe you're playing 15 or 20,000 people. The mini max, you're playing 30, 40,000 people, something like that too. So you can try to leverage ownership a little bit differently in those. So I always like to pull these up. I like to sort of see when anything does. Nothing really stood out to me, at least in terms of ownership. The other thing I really like to do on this screen, it's the only one you can really sort by fantasy points and try to see where the leverage spots were and sort of how you can apply that on a day-to-day basis. So here's something I like to do, right? Like you weren't winning last night without the Trae Young, Bradley Beal combo. Those aren't really the guys I was all too interested in, other than, at least talking about Trae Young. Anytime you can get him low owned, I saw Stevie tweet this out, where you get Trae Young low owned on a 6-game slate simply because he was going up in a perceived tough matchup, right? He wasn't even all too expensive. These are, extremely good leverage plays, and you can sort of see that play out as you go from the mini to the 20 max to, the fadeaway, which is the big 100K to first, $15 or something like that. You can see the ownership sort of creep up a little bit. I think the better players were sort of realized that Trae Young was going to be low owned, and anytime you get these ultra superstar players at low ownership for one reason or another, those are a pretty good spot to get leverage off of. I think Beal is, pretty well owned throughout the industry. Again, you can see here, though, as sort of the stakes increase just a little bit and the players get a little bit better, you can see Beal's ownership creep up from 20% to 27%. I think I had around 25% Beal last night. Unfortunately, that was not enough to save a bunch of my lineups going in. But here's sort of the real way to go, at least how I use this. And I sort of go position by position, and I sort at ownership. So at point guard last night, I want to talk about a couple of things that happened here. Donovan Mitchell, who obviously had himself a pretty bad night, and Kemba Walker. These guys, I think Mitchell was 7,200 and Kemba was 7,900, I think off the top of my head, something like that. They just carried a lot of ownership when you compare them to a couple guys a little further down this list that have just as much upside, if not more, that were maybe priced an extra $100 or $200 higher than I think the field would have liked. And these guys just didn't get owned enough compared to the situations they were in. So while everyone, based off projections and optimizers, is jamming in Donovan Mitchell and Kemba Walker, accounting for, in theory, 45% of the point guard ownership, I want to talk, of course, we had Trae Young, who had a massive night, right, at just 12.5%. But De'Aaron Fox, right, disappointed last time out. He was going up against the Clippers in a tough matchup, and he was 8,100. So he's just a little bit more than Kemba Walker. And is Kemba twice as likely to outperform De'Aaron Fox for an extra $100 or $200? I think that answer is clearly no. And these are where you can sort of get your edges by studying in results DB and then incorporating sort of what you think about into future builds. So De'Aaron Fox was certainly someone that made a little bit of sense looking back to play if you knew Kemba was going to be good, and our projected ownership on Kemba was pretty much right on par across the industry. So just getting a guy like Fox, I think, would have made quite a bit of sense in tournaments. Another one is Kyle Lowry, who these Toronto backcourt players are playing like 38, 39 minutes a night. How do we not want to play Kyle Lowry, who got 44 fantasy points? And is Kyle Lowry, is Kemba Walker going to outperform Kyle Lowry 3-1? I don't think so, but that's what the ownership played out. And this is how, if you're hand building, you can sort of get some edges. I like to specifically try to do it on the higher owned, mid, it's always tough getting leverage on the ultra high price players, but like the mid tier 6 to 8K players that are popular, if you can think about it and find swerves your own. And we'll try to do that in real time on tonight's slate at a little later towards the end of the show. This is how you sort of can get some leverage. Utilizing results DB, studying the field, and trying to pick guys out that do that ahead of time. So I wanted to, that was the point guard. If you go by position, let's go to small forward. And there's an extreme clear example. Tobias Harris. Now, our projected ownership, we had Harris at about, I think it was like 22 or 25 projected ownership. So that was a little bit of a miss on our part on the projected ownership, as he ended up being the highest owned player on the slate. But what you can do, right, is Tobias Harris was cheap, and Al Horford was out, and Josh Richardson's out, and we're all going to play Tobias Harris. And it makes a lot of sense. But for just a couple $100 less, I'm scrolling down. I got Gordon Hayward sitting here at 3%. So these are the questions you have to ask yourself when you make these really large field or even smaller field-ish sort of tournament lineups. Is Tobias Harris going to outscore Gordon Hayward 10-1? 10 times, 9 times out of 10, because that's basically what the ownership was last night, even higher, actually. It was more like 13 or 14-1. And the answer to that is astoundingly no. And for just a couple $100 more, you could have played Gordon Hayward, who, right, we had Jason Tatum coming back, and Gordon Hayward, we can't play him. Can't play him because Tatum's coming back and it's going to kill him. These are how you play these extremely large field tournaments, in my opinion. Trying to select leverage plays off the extremely high-owned players. Now, you can play Tobias Harris at 40, 50. You can go way over on Tobias Harris to try to get your edge. But in the long run, if you're really smart, I think the best way to do it is try to get leverage, plus or minus $500. Find some guy who's just going to be so much lower owned that, of course, nobody isn't going to play, and trying to get some more exposure to them. So let's go to center. Now, didn't actually look at center yet as I was preparing for this. So let's try to find this in our own minds here. So we had Marquise Chris was the chalk play du jour at 40% ownership, followed right behind Joel Embiid. Now, I played a lot of Chris and I played a lot of Embiid, so I was a little bit of a chalk donkey last night. Thomas Bryant was interesting. I think those who stuck with him got a little lucky. He only played 23 minutes. I think once he moved to the bench, I went way under on Bryant. I was considering having 50 to 60% Bryant earlier in the day. And I went to, I think, low teens ownership on Thomas Bryant by the time it was all said and done. So with Bryant, in my mind, I went way down in ownership. I tried to play a couple other people. It was giving me a lot of Deadman on lineup HQ. I donked it up, and I basically played the field with Dwayne Dedmon at around 18 to 20%. But Dedmon, right, who has the ability to play these 30-minute games as a starter, who's been pretty volatile, he looked like he was the swerve off of a guy like Chris last night. If you knew Chris was going to be twice as owned as Dedmon, I definitely would have played a little bit more Dedmon in my lineup. So that was a mistake I made. And another one was, Embiid, and we had Jokic, right? Is Embiid in this spot going to outscore Jokic 4-1? 75, 80% of the time. This is another spot where I don't think so. So if you were able to play Jokic, who's actually had a pretty good career against Rudy Gobert, I actually X'd out Rudy Gobert, but I did like Jokic a little bit. You could get a big edge on the field, right? 7.5 points just at the center position, right, is a big swerve if you were able to do something like that. So this is how I try to apply it. It's always hard to physically click those names. It's hard to click those buttons over 150 lineups, but these are how some of the best players in the world get a little bit of leverage. So let's talk about some of the best players out here. So I took a wide swath of players from last night's. This is all from the fadeaway from last night. We'll go through Michael Leone. He's a good, well, I wouldn't say good friend, but I know him from multiple interactions. Brick75, I think, is one of the best players. Our own Squirrel Patrol from RotoGrinders, Utica, who's up at the top of the rankings, Mr. Goodseats, who has a very specific style of play, and then I have the winner of the tournament over on Redcoat 85. And I talk about this a lot. Is it's hard to win long term. As a casual or even as a really good player in DFS, but there are a lot of different ways to win. So first I'll start with Leone over here. And one of the things I pay attention to is what is the max percentage of a player that's being allowed by some of these top players on a certain slate. You'll see when we have the 10x value guys, they basically 100% jam them in some of the times, or they take some really strong fades and don't play any of them. Last night, we didn't really have that guy. We didn't have a guy who was, 4,200 that we thought was going to get 40 fantasy points or anything like that. So basically across the board, you can see Leone played him 56. His top player was 56%. Brick75 was at 68%. Squirrel Patrol, who's done a couple of the Roto Academy videos. If you ever wanted to find those, he basically doesn't ever go over 80%, he said, and you can see he stuck to that rule. Utica was at 80%, but just on one. Goodseats, like I said, he has a very specific style of play. He will play his guys and play them a lot. He doesn't really care about anything else. He likes his guys. And then we have the winner over here, who I think, these are pretty reasonable exposures, at least up at the top here. So everyone's pretty different across the board, but it seemed like nobody was 100% play. And I was under that same impression. I set my max at 70% last night in lineup HQ. I didn't think there was any spectacular play. I will gladly go to 100% on one or even two players. When I think the value is really, really good, I'll just play those guys across all my teams. But I did not see that last night. And I think my thoughts, at least looking at some of these top players, 50, 70, Squirrel Patrol, just one player at 75 and a couple around 60. This was sort of in line with what I thought on my distributions last night. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that, not exactly for my results. I got back like 2/3 of my money in tournaments, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But of course, you're trying to win. But I just wanted to point that's something I sort of look for. One of the other things I want to talk about is I want to look at the winner over here. So Redcoat 85, he played 150 entries, and I found this pretty fascinating. Ships $100,000. So let's give him a round of applause, Mr. Redcoat 85. I don't know who Redcoat 85 is. I've never looked at him before. I don't really know. If you're putting in 150 entries into the fadeaway, you got to have some money. Maybe he's got it from DFS. I don't know who he is. So this is the first time I've ever looked at him. But what I found very interesting yesterday is, one, I wish this could happen to me, where his top 4 highest owned players. So I've got him sorted over here. Tobias Harris, right? A ho-hum 36, but as the highest owned player in the entire field, that's not going to get you anywhere. Kevin Huerter, Malik Beasley, and Marquise Chris. Basically, his top 4 players accounting for a huge portion of his ownership. They all stunk. And you still win $100,000. Wow. How guys, how do we do this? So let's try to figure out how we managed to do this. And I think it had to do with a couple of things. One, Trae Young, he was 13, the field across this contest was at 14%. He had 30% Trae Young. So he basically had 30% win equity. You had to have Trae Young in order to sniff a top lineup last night. So he did that with Trae Young. If he realized Trae Young was an elite leverage play and nobody was going to use him, that seems like a pretty good spot here. The other thing he did was on Jokic, right? So I just mentioned Joel Embiid being a little underweight on him to play some Jokic. And again, right here, 35% on Jokic. That gave him a 7-point advantage at center over a lot of the Embiid teams too. So I think he made 2 really smart decisions right here in terms of ownership towards the top of it, whether it was by projections, whether it was by using a little bit of randomness, whether it was actually pushing those guys to a minimum ownership on whatever site he uses. I don't know anything about that, but those were 2 pretty strong plays I think he made, along with sticking with Dwayne Dedmon. You can see only Brick 75 had higher than him across the board. And when Dedmon, who was just, at 17%, who has been playing some minutes and had the ability to have a good game as the starter, and he's disappointed for several games in a row, it did not deter Redcoat or Brick 75, who I think Brick 75, he's a player I really like to try to study and try to get into his mind. But it looks like Redcoat really made it up with Dedmon, with Jokic, and with Trae Young, were some of his stronger stands to really juice his teams up the leaderboard, even with basically completely falling flat on his 4 highest owned players. So even if your best plays stink, if your next tier, if you're like, these are all the perfect leverage plays, Jokic, Trae Young, and Dedmon, if those hit and you have your portfolio of 150 lineups, you're able to sort of boost yourself up a little bit. So a hat tip to Redcoat. Again, right, he was actually underweight. Beal was like another guy you had to have slightly underweight on Bradley Beal, but it just didn't matter. So you go and check out the winning lineup over here. He had Trae Young. He had Jordan Clarkson. I'm interested to see where his Clarkson ownership was. So he was just basically slightly ahead of the field. Clarkson was 20% without Conley in there. And you could see he was at 26%. So he was able to get a little bit there. He had Beal. Bridges was another key at 13.18%. If I go back and let me try to find Bridges over here. So Redcoat on Miles Bridges had 14%. So basically right at the field on that. Nothing too out of the ordinary. He just basically played the perfect leverage. He played De'Aaron Fox in the winning lineup. I talked about him. He played Dwayne Dedmon. He had Trae Young. He had Bradley Beal in this. He filled it in with a couple other guys. Basically didn't even hit on Malik Beasley, but at 3,500 at 17, just enough to give him enough salary to squeak everything in. So I think that was a pretty good lineup overall from Redcoat 85. And it just goes to show you, if you just make some smart decisions in leverage, whether it's at the top of the field, did you need, if Jokic is 11%, do you need 82% of them? No, I don't think you need that. But this is, to get 3x the field, it's only taken up a third of your lineups when you have 150 and you're getting leverage on Embiid, who's, one of the higher owned, similarly priced centers. These are excellent plays by him, in my opinion. So congratulations to him. Let's just go over a couple other players here too. So I always like to look at Mr. Good Seats. He's when the chalk smashes, Mr. Good Seats usually has good games. He'll play his plays. This is another interesting style where you just play your guys, whatever they're projected at, and you just go for it. And you play your guys, you play them all heavy. And if you look at Mr. Good Seats, he'll basically do this night in, night out. I think he's a pretty good player too. So just two very different styles from Mr. Good Seats to a guy like Brick 75, who you'll see, some leverages in here. He leveraged on Ish Smith. He went double the field on Marquise Chris. He also liked Tobias Harris. He liked Dwayne Dedman, and he liked Jordan Clarkson. You'll see some, Dwayne Dedman. There's a couple others in here. Ish, we talked about. Rudy Gobert, he was 3x the field on Rudy Gobert. I'm going to imagine he had 18% Jokic. So just trying to figure out what some of these guys do. You can't just look at it once. You can't just look at it twice. You can't just look at it 3 times. You can't just look at it 4 times. Is day after day, go to the RotoGrinders leaderboards, see how the best players are basically allocating their 150, and try to replicate one of them. It's tough to do that on a day in, day out basis. But if you think about it, a lot of these guys have their own systems, in Excel. They make a bajillion lineups and they sort them in an outside program to basically cherry pick all of their 150 lineups. That's basically the highest end level of DFS. You can't even really do that basically on any system that's available for purchase. They've created their own. But you can try to recreate some of these things. So now let's have fun with me, right? I was having fun to get ready for this. I played in my 150 lineups last night. So let's see how I donked it up, and let's have a little bit of fun with me. Again, I got about 2/3 of my money back. Whatever, it's not really all too concerning to me. But one of the guys I liked, I decided to have leverage Will Barton, right? I think our ownership was right on point with him, at least projected at about 30%. And I decided with everybody out in Denver, I was going to try to play some Denver players. So I had Will Barton. Monty Morris was another guy I played a lot of. That obviously backfired for me. And then I had some Malik Beasley. Now, Malik Beasley ended up in the winning lineup for $100,000. So I'm not sure if that was a bad play. But I decided I was going to get leverage on the Denver guards. And I don't think that really worked across the board. They all slightly underperformed, which was basically my downfall last night. Embiid, I liked a lot of Embiid. I liked a lot of the Sixers. I actually set a rule. I think I played at least 2 Sixers in every lineup. Unfortunately, it wasn't Shake Milton. It ended up being through Lineup HQ, a lot of Embiid, a lot of Harris, and a lot of Simmons. So I didn't get that value on Shake Milton. The Lineup HQ was trying to give me Milton, but I dialed him down. I think I had 3% Milton or something like that. I kept dialing it down every time I was rebuilding, which ended up being a bad play. So I should have trusted the Lineup HQ projections, but I wanted more of the known quantities. So I had a rule of 2 Sixers myself. And I also had one where if I played Trae Young, which I did 9%, which was basically right at the field, I wanted definitely 2 of Embiid, Harris, and Simmons. I specifically made that rule in and of itself to get the star quality Sixers guys if I had Trae Young in a lineup, which again, that was sort of a downfall of my Trae Young teams. Sure, they basically all ended up with Tobias Harris. Well, Simmons was fine and Embiid was fine, just though the price didn't really work in Lineup HQ when I paid up for all of them. and you basically ended up having to have Beal in your Trae Young lineups for it all to work out. I was actually overweight Beal just slightly. I manually bumped him up to 25% in the projections. Got exactly that, and it didn't work out for me. I didn't have him on any of my Trae Young teams, I think, unfortunately. Let's see if there's any other stands I made here. So you sort by the field. I talked about Malik Beasley. Herder was another one. I liked Herder. I ended up using Herder in cash. I think a lot of people ended up doing that too. It just, he was another reason why it sunk sort of my lineups. Pretty volatile. Hasn't really had too many good games over the past, week or two. That would have been a good spot for me to not donk it up and just go along with the chalk or even really go overweight on them. I should have maybe shifted off of that a little bit. And I think that would have helped me out too. I talked about Kemba Walker, right? I went a little bit underweight. Our ownership projection was around 24. So I knocked him down. I think it was to 16 or 17%. I probably should have done it a little less. Looking back on it to get more of the Fox, right? I had 18% Fox, somebody I liked. I thought he would be around 10%. He ended up being around 15%. I was trying to get around double the field on Fox. I didn't take away enough Kemba to get enough De'Aaron Fox in my opinion as well. So you can look through sort of your play styles. You can see I had Monty Morris. Mahimny was another one too, right? I was basically out on Thomas Bryant. So I tried to get a little bit of leverage on Mahimny. That didn't work out either. That was probably a dumb move on my spot. Mahimny just never really gets there, but I thought he could play maybe 26 or 28 minutes, and Thomas Bryant played 22 to 24 minutes, something like that. But they ended up playing a couple other minutes of other people at center, and Mahimny didn't really get there too. So that was a little bit of a leverage spot I tried to play. Nothing really too far out here. Reddish was probably just the projections. I didn't really have a particular stand on him. Moutier, right? Like this is a really important spot too, I think, to get leverage on the 2 to 10% owned players is something I think I strive to make the correct decision on. So Jokic, I talked about him with Embiid, I was up to 18% Jokic. So being able to identify what the ownership of these guys is ahead of time and then properly adjusting based on what you want. This is where I think the tournaments are won, is the 2 to 10% on plays that have big games or are the correct leverage spots. Doing that properly, that is much more important than having, 45% Ben Simmons when the field's at 36%, right? This is not as meaningful as sort of doubling up the Jokic ownership, right? Like this is a much more meaningful, and you're also not allocating as many of your lineups to this. So I spend more of my time in lineup HQ trying to identify the 2 to 10% own, or 2 to 15% own players that I think are the leverage spots and trying to get a little bit more ownership on them. That's, to me, probably one of the most important aspects of these large field tournament GPPs. So that's a little bit of my strategy, a little bit of what I did last night, a little bit of what a lot of the professionals did last night, what the winner did. And, I think I think about things sort of the same, but also a little bit differently than a guy like Jordan, who does a lot of these, and Tuttle and Mangone. I just wanted to bring my own little take on sort of the things I look for and maybe how you can try to apply them. So let's talk about trying to apply some of that. Now, I have not done this. I was waiting for projected ownership to come out. So let's see. The hamster wheel has spun and our ownership is out. So let's try to apply some of this in real time to tonight's slate, right? So let's see first if we agree with sort of the high ownership. So we've got Jalen Brunson with who is it? Jaren Jackson, or not Jaren Jackson. Luke is going to be out. And he had a very good run of games with Luke out earlier in the season. So Jalen, the $3,800 fades, I'm much less interested in in fading the basically best point per dollar of the slate. Jalen would be someone I would consider hitting a lock button on instead, right? If he's going to approach 50 to 70% at 3,800, this is not the guy I typically try to go against the field on. I'm more apt to lock in the absolute nut value play of the day. LeBron is really interesting tonight because he's 10-3. He's definitely going to be the highest owned, high-priced player, and there's a lot of narratives with this being the Lakers' first game since Kobe. So, he's probably going to have a pretty good game. Harden's ownership, I don't know if the recency bias is going to start ticking Harden's ownership down, but if you start reading or the ownership starts going down on him, he would be an interesting pay-up option over a guy like LeBron, or you could even play Westbrook, who's just going nuts every night right now and still looks like he's not getting the respect on the ownership, nowhere really towards the top of the page. So let's take a look at a couple other guys at point guard. DraftKings pricing it's a little bit softer today than it has been. So it's a little bit different of a game than it has been for probably the past week or so. All these prices are down. So Kyrie is someone I mentioned on the morning grind. I'm out on Kyrie tonight. I would have zero Kyrie Irving against the Bulls. Bulls pretty stingy defensively. Kyrie didn't really do it in his last game. And the 9K price tag, what I would rather do with the 9K is go up to, a LeBron or a Westbrook, or maybe go, with Kyrie at 15%, right? We've got Van Vliet and Lowry, right? We can just go right back to the Toronto guards against Detroit. We have them for 35 minutes. Newsflash, probably both going to play more than 35 minutes tonight if this game stays close. That's just what they do. So if I pop them each up to 37, don't be afraid to make some changes to the player pool either. As good as our projections are, if you're playing the same projections as everybody else and you're not really doing anything, you're just going to have the same lineups as everybody else. So don't be afraid to make a couple of changes to tailor it to your own. So if I bump them both up to 37, their point per dollar goes up. I would certainly start getting more. I'm going to have big leverage using both of them if their ownership stays low. So based on first look on the ownership, I think right off the bat, two of my favorite leverage plays would be one of Lowry or Van Vliet based on ownership at the point guard position. A couple other at shooting guard. Let's try to do this one. So we've got Brunson. I think if I end up MMEing tonight, I would play 100% of Brunson as it stands right now. The other guys, I do agree Harden will have some ownership. I like McCollum, especially with Melo out. He's been playing pretty well, and he got the price tag reduction, right? He's 6,400 against the Lakers. He hasn't been 6,400 in a while. So, I like that. If he's just going to be 18% owned because everyone's playing Brunson and just McCollum stays low, I think I could maybe play like 30% of them or 35 and be pretty happy with it. I would imagine our projections, I haven't ran any yet, but I would probably end up getting a little bit more McCollum. If you just go down the line a little bit, you can see a guy like Mikal Bridges. I mentioned him on the morning grind too. So his minutes are really starting to boost up over the past couple of games. 33, he's in this 32. He has the ability to post these high 20. He hit a 40. He's got a 34. He's got a 31, right? Like the dude has a ceiling at 4,200 against OKC. Right? If you leave him at 22 fantasy points, you're not really going to get too much. But if you bump him up to like 25, right, he's jumping up way up the ladder in point per dollar. So Bridges is someone I would certainly, if he stays at 8%, have no problem being in the 20 to 30% range. Getting 2 to 3x leverage as a 4,200 player. You're still playing him with Brunson. If you wanted to be ultra smart, maybe too sharp for your own good, you could, if Brunson's if it's hard, if Brunson's at shooting guard, maybe you play Bridges, but I think, I'm going to play 100% Brunson. So I think Bridges is somebody at low ownership that looks like you could have some leverage. Devin Booker, no one's playing Devin Booker. If you like 50 fantasy points, right? I don't know why our projection's at 42.9. You're not going to get any Devin Booker at 42.9. But you're not playing Devin Booker in tournaments to get 42.9 fantasy points. You're playing Booker to get 50 fantasy points and 60 fantasy points and 55 fantasy points. So if you see Booker down here at a 4.7 point per dollar, no matter what you do to everything else in lineup HQ, you're not going to get any Devin Booker at 9,100. He's just not a good point per dollar. He's not going to cycle through. So you have to then manually give him like 48 Draftkings points, which is still probably too low, right? Because that's not what you're playing him for. So Booker at 6% looks like a pretty good leverage spot. If he hits his 50 to 60 fantasy points, he's probably going to be on a winning lineup if he's going to stick at around 6% ownership. So this is how I go through lineup HQ, trying to determine the guys I want on a night in, night out basis and trying to get leverage off of. Spend your time. Don't worry about, is LeBron James going to be 34% owned and should I play 50% or should I play 25%? That doesn't have as big of an impact as playing 25% Mikal Bridges and he hits for 28 fantasy points at 4,200. That's what moves you up leaderboards, at least when you're allocating throughout your 150 to me. So I focus on this range of players of ownership, not so much on the higher end when I'm trying to really determine who gets into my teams. Will Barton at 16%, I would imagine that goes up towards the end of the night, right? These are all just algorithm based this early in the morning. But if he stays that low, at 5,800, I have no problem running this back last night. 36 minutes. Didn't really have any of the peripherals that he tends to get right. Low on assists, probably a little low on rebounds. Had an okay shooting night, right? So there's certainly room for him to pop up into the 30s or 40 fantasy point range. And it's against Milwaukee. That looks like a pretty strong play. If he stays at just 16%, I'd have no problem going a little bit higher than him. Going to the power forward position. Let's see what's happening here. So Brandon Clark, we've got in for 31 minutes. It's tough to see it's going to be him or Solomon Hill. One of these guys is going to end up playing a really good chunk of minutes, and the other one's probably going to play about 26 to 28 minutes. I'm not exactly sure who they are. Solomon Hill at 3K. Can he get it done if he plays 27 minutes? Scrolling. So, like, he's got 139. Like, even if he gets 21 at 3K, I think that's enough. But, man, Solomon Hill is just not someone who gets there. So, I'm going to have to – he's someone I'm going to have to wait and see what that starting lineup is. I'm going to have to look at his ownership. And I might take a stand to not really – I know it's tough to fade these 3K players, but I just don't like the Solomon Hills, the Tony Snells, the guys that just don't really do anything on the floor. I tend to not want to play them in tournaments too often. I like a lot of action on my players. Zion, 7K, he was 7,200. He gets a $200 price bump. Sort of disappointed in this last game. Maybe that's keeping his ownership down for a couple of reasons. Everyone's going to play Clark, who I do like. Clark's interesting. I don't think I'd play 100% Clark because I still think there's certainly ways he just plays 28 minutes, even though we have him at 31. He's just a guy they don't like giving minutes to. He just never gets to 31. I would think we're maybe a tad aggressive on 31 minutes. So I would bump him to maybe like 29. That's going to lower his point per dollar. That's going to lower how often I get him into that. So I would imagine if I'm MMEing later today, that Clark would probably be somebody I would be underweight on at that 36% ownership. I see a couple of questions. Would you play Hill and Clark together? I probably would not do something like that. I would set a rule to specifically, especially if Hill starts, I would definitely play Clark not in the same lineup as Solomon Hill. So that's how, like, Brandon Ingram, dude, he just does not exist to me. I will have zero Brandon Ingram until he's about a 6K player on DraftKings or something like that. Just with Zion and everybody else, he went from getting 8 or 9 rebounds a game to getting like 1 rebound a game, and you can't play him, right? 1, 3, 2. Well, guess what? That was Zion. You go back here, 11, 7, 11. Well, that's with no Zion. So Ingram is he's too highly priced. He's about a 6K player to me with Zion playing 30 plus minutes. So I would have no problem taking Ingram specifically right out of my player pool. I would swerve. A guy I like tonight is Kelly Oubre. I mentioned this in the morning grind too. If they're playing a close game, he's going to play much more to the 36, 38 minutes than he will to the 30 minutes. And a little streaky, but at just 6,300 when he pops off for 40 fantasy points at that price tag, that's a tournament winning player. And those are the guys, if he stays at 12%, you could put at 20 to 25%, and you can get yourself some good leverage on players like that. You want exposure to guys who really have the ceiling. So like an Oubre definitely does, and he's someone I would have a lot of interest in tonight. Let's go one more time to center, and we'll start wrapping up. I'll take a couple of questions if you guys have anything. Right, if you're on the YouTube, click the like, subscribe, and all that. The suits like it. We got the RotoGrinders party coming up. I got to look good at that thing. I need my numbers up, so click that like button if you're over on YouTube. And if you got any questions, shoot them in chat, and I'll chat it out with you for a couple of minutes. So let's go to center, and we've got to try to find everyone, right? Like Valanciunas and Clark. These guys are going to be extremely popular. So Valanciunas, right, back-to-back 33 and 31-minute games. This is not the norm for him. Now you got Jaren Jackson out. You've got Memphis is definitely going to compete for the 8th seed in the West. I think they're a reasonably good basketball team, and I think they can sneak into the playoffs. There's no need, I think, for them to sort of not play Valanciunas. So I think Valanciunas, after his good couple of games, he was 67 and 64. I don't understand how he drops to 6,300. He should be about a 7K player to me tonight, but he's 63. That's really upping his ownership. If you sort by salary at the center position, right around him. So what are we going to try to – how do we get leverage on a Valanciunas? One, I don't know if we need it. He's someone I think I'm fine playing the 31%. I'm fine playing more. I'm fine playing a little less if you want to take out ownership. So Porzingis is another guy who's 6,800. I think his ownership's probably going to creep up throughout the day. I would imagine he probably plays like 28 to 30 minutes. I know they haven't really been doing that, but without Luka, they're basically going to be forced to, I think, to try to match the firepower of Houston. And he's like a 1.5 fantasy per minute player with Luka off the court. So Zinger looks like if Zinger's going to stay at around half the ownership, he costs 500 more, but I could certainly see, right, our projections are just like 2 fantasy point difference here. And that's with us also thinking Valanciunas plays 31 minutes, which has really only happened in a couple of games. So there's a lot of ways to think that Porzingis outdoes Valanciunas, and I don't think Valanciunas outdoes him 2-1, 66 to 33% of the time, at least in terms of ownership. So I think you can go to some Zinger. You've got Clark down here as well. Other than that, I mean, it's not really juicy. I think Serge is another guy I think you could go to get some leverage. He's going to play big minutes with Gasol out. It's against Drummond, who, as good as Drummond is on the boards, he can be had on his own. Serge is a very high field goal percentage player too. He only had 4 rebounds last game and still gave us 37 fantasy points. There's ways for Serge at that price tag at just 6,900 to have himself a really good game against Drummond. And he looks like, at least in this little price range, he's the guy drawing the lowest ownership. So Serge is probably another guy. Zion as well. He looks pretty juicy to me. I think, if one of these guys really emerges, if Valanciunas' ownership creeps up to 35, 40%, I like that, but I think I could also see ways of swerving to some of the lower owned guys here. So go through lineup HQ. Don't spend all the time in the world trying to figure out, should I play, 50% Brandon Clark or should I play 25% Brandon Clark? Don't try to do that. Try to find leverage off the high owned plays, up those guys' ownerships just a little bit. And that's how I try to approach my game when I'm in lineup HQ. So I think we went through a lot of my own thoughts in this one. If you guys have a couple of questions, let's see here. So everyone's sleeping on Jay Crowder tonight. I would I don't know if we're sleeping on Jay Crowder, but Jay Crowder is an interesting player. So he's 12%. He's like a whatever ownership player tonight. He's 4,500. The problem is, he can post these games, right? So 33, 30, 39. But if you allocate, I guess I don't mind it. Like a guy like Oubre, even if he doesn't do great, he's probably going to get you like 30 or something like that. But the price tag on Crowder is good enough where, if he hits you with the 13 or the 15 fantasy point game, it's not going to be a good result if you have a lot of ownership to him. So he's pretty volatile, even with some other players out. I think he's a fine play. I have no problem being, if he comes in at 12% ownership, coming in at like 20%. But Crowder is not someone I would like choose. I'm taking a stand on Jay Crowder. I'm playing him in 50% of my lineups. That's how you can kill a lot of your lineups very quickly. And specifically, if you play more than like one or two Jay Crowder type of players in a lot of your lineups, you can really kill. It's like a synergistic effect, 75% of your lineups extremely quickly. So just pay attention with what you're doing with Crowder. If you're playing one lineup, sure, cool. If you're playing 10 lineups, I don't think I'd play him in more than like 3 of them or something like that. Let's see here. JV and Cash, yes, that's going to be extremely popular. Go with Jordan. I'm not on DeAndre Jordan. He's just not. I know he's like okay, and in theory, it's a good spot inside against Chicago. But like he's 4,300, and again at 4,300, a 27 just starts getting you there. And if he happens to get into the low 30s, it's all right. But I don't know. I'd much rather play Allen, and I don't even think I'd play Allen too much tonight. So I'm just out on the centers in Brooklyn. Thoughts on Lakers? I mean, the Lakers are 2 guys and 2 guys only. They're both going to be pretty popular tonight. It's LeBron and it's Anthony Davis, and I think the narratives for at least LeBron tonight is going to be really strong. I think LeBron's easily going to be the highest owned of the expensive players. So it's not like LeBron is incapable of, right? Look at his recent performance. Now he's had some time off, and you got the Kobe stuff happening, but it's not like LeBron was just crushing it out of the park. 4 of his last 7 in the 40s. That's not going to do it for you at 10.3K tonight. So I like LeBron. I think I would be more likely to allocate him of all of the high-owned players. You can see he's at 34. Westbrook still at 6. I think Westbrook deserves some serious leverage consideration with how good he's been playing and how Harden is sort of deferring to him right now. You've got Anthony Davis. I might actually play Anthony Davis over LeBron. I mean, that's saving, $700, and you can allocate that somewhere else. Someone says Kuzma. I don't think AD's sitting. No one from the Lakers is sitting tonight. I can pretty much guarantee you that. Dorian Finney-Smith. So I wish I had like a curve of Dorian Finney-Smith fantasy projections or outputs, because it doesn't really go anywhere. It stays right around the middle. Even with Luka out, if you got 25 from him tonight, you're probably feeling pretty good. I think there's a little bit of room for upside. He's 4,400, 10% ownership. I would be underweight on DFS. He's just not the high ceiling play. So let's find another $4,400 player that is much more of the guy I like to play in tournaments. So let's find a couple here. I think I would much rather play Crowder over DFS, right? Crowder has shown multiple times in recent games he can post these high 30 fantasy point games. I would much rather play a guy like Crowder than DFS. I would much rather play Mikal Bridges for less money than Dorian Finney-Smith. I would play Christian Wood for sure. If Markieff Morris, he's questionable. If Markieff Morris sits, Wood's ownership is going to go from 1 to like 20. But I would much rather play him. Satoransky's another guy who's playing a ton of minutes right now. In these good games from the Bulls, he plays, 30 plus minutes pretty easily. He hasn't flashed the huge ceiling, but he's just 46. I'd much rather play him. So DFS, if you're in the 10% of players who play him, I think in the long run, you're just sort of donating to the field because there's just a very rare ceiling game from him. He goes out, even with Luka out, and does what he does, and he'll get you 26. But I'm not playing to get 26. I'm playing for one of these other guys to have a spike game that shows the ability to get 35 or 40 fantasy points. And that's what I want on my tournament teams, not the floor of DFS. So I hope that makes sense for you. Any Thunder guys? So the Thunder are really interesting on DraftKings tonight because they're all going to be lowish owned and they all got ridiculous price decreases. So CP3, right? 6,800 tonight. He was 74, 75. I don't know what happened. He's going up against Phoenix. The algorithm went haywire in the pricing room at DraftKings. So both CP3, SGA, and Schroeder, all too cheap. If you're just Schroeder has been on fire, right? And nobody plays him because he's not the guy who's starting and he's not going to get all the minutes. But Schroeder at 2% looks like an extreme leverage spot tonight. If you can play 10% of him and have the ability to physically click his name into like a 3-max or something like that, you're giving yourself so much leverage over the field. I like him the most, followed by probably CP3 and then SGA. But when the pricing algorithm goes haywire on some guys, you have to take advantage of that. They're all in good spots, and I definitely like the OKC guys tonight. I guess that's probably going to do it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed what I went over today, sort of how I use results DB, what I look for in tournaments, how I try to create leverage throughout my 150. And then the only problem is physically clicking those guys into your builds, either while you're doing it by hand or adjusting them in lineup HQ to make sure you're getting what you want. So like right now, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to give myself 8% Schroeder. I'm going to give myself, I don't think I need to do too much on these two to get some. And then like a rule I would make is I would probably not play. We can talk about groups real quick. I don't think I would play all three of them in the same lineup. I'm probably not going to get all of them in the same lineup anyway, but I want to make sure that I would not get all three of these guys in the same lineup. I think it's very hard for all three of them to get there. So a quick, simple rule you can do is just throw them all in here, max at 2, and you're sort of on your way on that one. So have fun. Let me know what you think. Send me a message on Twitter, a DM on RotoGrinders, hit me up on Discord. Let me know what you thought of the show. Click the thumbs up. The suits like it. We're going to be hanging out with the suits all weekend at the RotoGrinders party. Don't worry. There's still going to be plenty of content. The site doesn't shut down just because we're all having fun out in Nashville. There'll be plenty of content all weekend long. And have fun out there tonight. So thanks to everyone for watching. I'm Britt, and we out ya.